I wanted to talk to you about the case of dysfunction in families. I recently counseled, or sort of counseled, so to speak, even though I didn't say much, a situation between a father and his grown son in regard to a property that was inherited. And it made me realize a level of dysfunction between people. There are sometimes people that the only way they communicate is to argue. That's the only way that they get along. That's the only way that they can communicate between each other. And for some people, that's the only way that they show love to each other. Other than that, they wouldn't speak to each other at all. So let me tell you about the scenario some of you might be able to relate. And I'm getting over a bit of a cold, so if you hear me cough or clear my throat, please excuse me. It's a situation where the father had inherited a house from his mother, and he got into trouble with the law and had to go away and do some time for a while. And before he got in trouble with the law, he dispersed of some of his assets, fortunately, before he got in trouble with the law. And one of the assets he put into his grown son's name was the house. So that way when he got in trouble with the law, the house wasn't confiscated. So he went ahead and he did some time for quite a while. And his son moved into the house. So when the father got out of prison, instead of just living in the house, he just went ahead and he got a place of his own, not the same town, but not far away. It was within driving distance, a couple of hours away. And the son stayed in the house. But of course, the father would go visit from time to time, see how he was doing. But the son wasn't very responsible when it came to taking care of the house. Fell behind in taxes and insurance from time to time and would go to the father and ask the father for money. And the father did it a couple of times until he realized that the son didn't stay gainfully employed enough to maintain. Now, mind you, the house was paid for. All he had to do was, maintain the taxes and the insurance. Now, the son did keep the house up as far as maintenance and upkeep, landscaping. He did do his part in regards to that. He just didn't take care of the house as far as the taxes and the insurance. Now, he maintained the utility bills and things like that. But as far as like the legal things, like the state and federal taxes, he didn't maintain those things. And the father made it a point to kind of let him know how important that was. And the son just wasn't grasping the concept. So they would get into it from time to time about that. And the father got frustrated one day. And I think the father was frustrated about another personal matter, and they just had a huge blow-up behind it. And the son was already feeling a certain type of way because his father got into trouble and had to go to jail for so long and was out of his life for the majority of his teenage years, which was formative years. So all that frustration that he had behind that, he kind of kept bottled up. So that was brought up in the conversation as well. They had a huge blow up and didn't speak to each other for several months. And finally, when they came back together, the father wanted him to sign over ownership back to him for the house, and the son said no. So the father threatened to take him to court and all this stuff. They never went to court, and they kind of just buried the hatchet. But from time to time, they would get along and blow up and get along and blow up and get along and blow up. So very recently, they had a birthday party for one of the elders, and they went back, and he went back over to the city that they were in because the son lived in the same city as the elder. And he went back to the house again, and the son was behind in taxes again. This time to the point where the state was talking about putting a lien on the house and the property. And father blew up again, and this time they had to blow up at the elder's birthday party in front of everybody. And because of the whole embarrassment behind that, the dirty laundry came out about it, and now other relatives are getting involved. So Finally, they decided they would come to me and ask me what to do about it. And I said, look, I said, you guys been back and forth several years about this. I said, what are you going to do? And so basically, it's a case of two stubborn people that are extremely alike. They both look alike. Father and son are identical. Both speak alike, carry themselves the same. And I'm sitting up here listening to one talk about how he needs to do this and do that, and then the other one over talking each other, same hand gestures and everything else, and I'm just sitting up there listening. You know, I'm taking notes and paying attention to what's going on, and after about 45 minutes into the hour that they paid me, I finally just sat there for a few minutes, and I was very quiet, and they looked at me and they said, well, what do you think he should do? What do you think he should do? I said, I'm going to give you both a solution. I said, but I doubt very seriously if you're going to listen to what I have to say. Oh, no, this has been going on and I'm tired and I'm tired. They're both talking about how tired they are. I said, this is what you could do. I said, if you really want a solution to this and you want to be peaceful and you want to be quiet, I said, this is what you could do. I said, you could both go to the attorney. And I said, and you both sign a document. I said, you go ahead and you put the house up for sale. Have the house and the property signed up for sale. Sell the property. Divide the proceeds down the middle. 50-50. I said, sir, you take your half. I said, you already got a place to stay. You do whatever you want with your half. And I said, son, I said, you go ahead and take your half, and you go ahead and you find yourself a place to stay. And I said, you move on with your life. And I said, that way this property won't be a source of headache anymore. I said, you won't be arguing and fussing with each other. And I said, that way you can go ahead and start fresh with a brand new relationship with each other. I said, because it seems to be the only thing the two of you are arguing over. I said, because as long as this property is between the two of you, I said, neither one of you is willing to compromise or try to work with trying to get this thing situated. I said, now your father wants to micromanage how you deal with the property. I said, now the truth is that you have to pay property taxes and insurance on the property. I said, I don't understand why you can't seem to maintain it on a regular basis. I said, I don't know if you're purposefully doing this to aggravate your father, because you've had this property for many years now and you know when it's due, but you refuse to maintain it. And I said, and as far as you're concerned, I said, you know that your son has had this problem for many years, but you continue to allow him to stay on the property instead of just taking it back. You continue to allow it anyway. I said, it seems like you're allowing this to continue to go on so you can argue with each other, so you can have a reason to communicate. You're allowing this arguing. That's the only way that you can talk to each other, is to argue. And I said, and it sounds weird, but I said, it seems like that's the only way that you can communicate with each other. So you're having this property as a means to be a part of each other's life. So you got to find another way to get along with each other. I said, but it's a simple solution. I said, if it's bothering you guys that much, sell the property, split the proceeds, and move on. I said, other than that, be prepared in another 6 months to have this argument again. Because it doesn't make any sense to me. They're like, oh, well, we'll think about it. And then they moved on. I hadn't heard anything since then. So I expect in about another 6 months, they'll probably be arguing again. This goes back to what I say about dysfunctional families, people. If you know that there's something that needs to be done at a certain period of time and that person refuses to do it, they do everything else that they need to do. But that's the only conversation that they have with this person. I believe, and I know this sounds very strange, y'all, I believe that the son is purposefully doing this just so he could get his dad's attention, even if it's negative. Just so his dad could come in, spend 2.5 hours on the road, come and spend time with him, even if they're fussing and arguing or whatever, so he could come spend time with him. And the father knows that it's every 6 months that his son is going to do this. And I mean, his son will be okay for about maybe maybe for about another 6 months he'll be okay, just to shut him up or whatever. But I mean, for the most part, it's usually at least once a year this happens. And he goes running. And he already knows in the back of his mind the following year or the following 6 months it's going to happen again. But yet he refuses to go and takes the house back. Because he knows it's not going to be homeless. And then he has the same conversation. Oh, well, you got to work a regular job and blah, blah, blah. And this man has enough money where he could put him up in an apartment for a couple of months till he can get himself together. Or at least extend his stay or whatever. So he knows that the boy is not going to be homeless. It's like that's their way of getting along. So put in the comments whether or not you run into a situation like that in the family, because it just doesn't make any sense that you sit up there scratching your head and you're wondering, why are these two people sitting up here after all these years still arguing about the same thing? And you see that there's a very obvious, simple solution about it. In this case, these two people have been going on for, I want to say about 6 or 7 years, I think, because I think, what was it, I want to say 2014 or 2015, I think the father told me that he, so it's been about 7 or 8 years now. I want to say, was it 2020? Yeah, it's been several years now. They've been going back and forth about this same little thing, and it's very obvious. I mean, if the house is that much of a pain in the butt, just sell the doggone thing, split the money but down the middle, and do it like that. But see, if they did that, they wouldn't have a reason to come together. So let me know in the comments if you have something funky like that going on in your family. So with that being said, I will go ahead and let you guys go. Peace.